There's a famous quote that says, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference." Now, whether you believe that to actually be true or not, maybe the argument could be made that the opposite of caring is indifference. Because if you hate something, you care about it enough to have a stance and an opinion about that thing. Whereas indifference, it occupies zero state in your mind. The reason why I bring this up is because it's very well documented that there have been several hated sets in Magic the Gathering the past few years. Just look at Aether Drift, there's Outlaws of Thunder Junction, or Murders at Karlov Manor. Just look anywhere that talks about these sets and you'll see very strong opinions of them. However, I have never seen anyone play or talk about one of the most forgotten subsets. I don't think we can actually call it a set, and that is the Clue cards that was a subset of Murders at Karlov Manor. Now, the reason probably why a lot of people don't actually play these cards is because they were all a part of a separate bundle, which you had to buy. It was exclusive. You couldn't get it in Murders at Karlov Manor booster packs, and at the time, it was like $80. There were 20 different packs that you could possibly get, but you were not guaranteed to get any of them. And so I think over the few years, I've got a few of them. I've got like 4 or 5 of one pack, and there's several that I've never gotten before. And so it is just as much of a gamble as anything. And people are like, well, I'm just going to buy singles. I actually recently bought 2 from Amazon because it's like $43 right now. And it's guaranteed to have a box topper Shockland with unique arts. I did get a Breeding Pool and a Blood Crypt. Even though Breeding Pool was reprinted and the price tanked with Edge of Eternities, this variant is still worth $34. And the Blood Crypt, if you sell it on Card Kingdom, it's still worth like $29 in credit. So I got that in an Amzu and that paid for it in one box. The other, I didn't really get anything of value other than the Shockland. Anyways, enough rambling. If you haven't figured out already, the topic of today's video is unpopular cards that came from this Clue bundle, which I think there was 51 unique new cards that were brought to Magic the Gathering. And a lot of them I am a big fan of. And so that's why I opened some of these, is because I didn't care about getting cheap cards. I thought it was fun and I'm going to be playing with them. And so I'm actually going to start out with honorable mentions of cards that I like, but I'm not going to dive into a ton of detail with, but I think are good. The first one is Apothecary White, which is the most played card from Clue, and it's still in only about 0.5% of the total decks that can play it, or in other words, 17,000 decks. This card goes crazy in food decks because you can tap X untapped foods you controlled and create X 1/1 white human creature tokens. It does not sacrifice those food tokens, and so if you have abilities like Pippin, then you can sacrifice them, or if you want to keep them, each turn you can just keep scaling. So really good card if you're playing a food deck. Headliner Scarlet is another one of the commanders from this set that is guaranteed to come in every pack or in every Clue bundle, and this one is pretty good. Like if you're looking to end a game, when Headliner Scarlet enters, creatures target player controls cannot block this turn, so you can just straight up wipe someone out of the game. And at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library face down. You may look at and play that card this turn. So not only does this have an ETB that can wipe someone out, it also has a good effect, kind of like Count on Luck, where every turn you exile the top card and you can play that. So it works well with play from exile synergies. Another honorable mention is Frenzied Gorespawn, who, when you enter, for each opponent, you can goad a target creature that player controls, and whenever one or more creatures attack one of your opponents, they gain menace until end of turn. I think both of those text boxes are nice. Goading creatures is always good, and then also anything that buffs up your opponent's creatures when they attack an opponent is always welcome, in my opinion. And the last honorable mention that I'll say today is Vernal Sovereign, mostly because that art is just sick. I mean, look at that. I love it. And when it enters or attacks, you create a green and white elemental creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. So if you're playing any go wide decks, or maybe like a Girid who can populate these tokens that you make, then that could be heavy beaters. And I like that it activates or that triggers when it enters or attacks. So that's pretty nice. But in terms of the actual unpopular cards that I want to dive into today, like I said, I'm actually surprised at how few decks most of these are played in, because I really like the abilities. So the first one we're going to talk about today is Afterlife Insurance, which is played in 12,400 decks. This is a 2-mana instant. You can pay 1 generic and either 1 white or 1 black. It's flexible. And it says, creatures you control gain Afterlife 1 until end of turn. Draw a card. And so if you're not familiar with Afterlife 1, it says, when a creature with Afterlife 1 dies, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. Yeah, this card is sick. Like, it's very cheap, the mana is flexible, and it has just a great effect. And not to mention, it's a cantrip, so it draws you a card. So the fact that this card is an instant lets you play it in a few different ways, both of which I think are very valid and pretty powerful. The most obvious use case for this, of course, is board wipe insurance. So if anyone casts a board wipe, then all of your creatures, that's another key point, is it says creatures you control. It's not non-token creatures. So if all of your tokens also die this turn, they will be replaced with a 1/1 white and black spirit with flying. So in a lot of the cases, that's going to be an upgrade to the tokens that you already had on the board. A second very strong use case outside of board wipe insurance is this card can let you go on some wild sacrifice trains. If you have, let's say, 5 tokens or expendable creatures on the board, and you just have a Zulaport Cutthroat and maybe a Bastion of Remembrance on the board, you just turn 10 life gain and drain into 20 because you get to sacrifice those 5 creatures, then you get 5 more to replace them to sacrifice again. So even better if you have a Mirkwood Bats available to do the draining when you create those tokens too. Or maybe you could put this in an Awaken the Blood avatar deck to make it easy to get back-to-back casts, assuming that you can pay for the commander tax and you don't need anything else to do that. A third aspect that's great is this is a triggered ability, so Teysa Karlov will double it up and give you 2 tokens for every 1 creature you control that dies. I guess like Teysa in general just really loves this card because Teysa Orzhov Scion is also just begging to try this card as well. But for how good this is, I think it must just be the fact that it's from Clue and this card hasn't broken into the EDH rectification cycle yet to be recommended to a ton of players. But for a 2-mana cantrip, I'm loving this card. Our next card is Amzu Swarm's Hunger, which is in 11,800 decks. Amzu is a 5-mana creature. It's 3 generic, 1 black and 1 green for a 3/3 insect shaman with flying and menace. It has an ability that says other insects you control have menace, and whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, you may create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, then put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among those cards, referencing the cards that left the graveyard. Do this only once each turn. I had read this card once before, I think when Clue came out, and I didn't think anything of it, but now that I have bought the Sultai Arisen precon, I now understand why this card is so good, and it's the most expensive card from the set at like $17, even though it has that once each turn clause. The first thing that is great is that this triggers when any kind of card leaves your graveyard. It wasn't until that I started to modify that precon that I realized just how many of the cards that care about things leaving the graveyard only care about when creatures leave the graveyard and nothing else, which makes that more difficult. But the fact that this triggers for instant sorceries, lands, or any other card type is just icing on the cake. The second thing is the +1/+1 counterpart. I totally must have glazed over the first time that I read this because that's really good. This let's actually say that you play another unpopular card in one of your decks from the set, Sludge Titan. And in this, you reanimate Sludge Titan from your graveyard to the battlefield. Not only do you get the Sludge Titan, you also create a 1/1 insect that is now a 7/7 insect with menace. Then, you also recur a land or a creature to your hand from Sludge Titan's ability as well. Granted, you won't create another insect, but if Tival the Balanced Scale is on the battlefield, then that's 2/2 zombies from 1 reanimate spell that you just cast. Yes, I know this is, like I said, limited to once each turn, but that's better than saying do this only on your turn or, something about sorcery speed. If you have any way to exile or recur cards from your graveyard with an ability or at instant speed, then that's just even more value from this card. Now, all that to say, we haven't even got to the part where those 7/7 token, insect token that we just created also has Menace, so it's going to be a lot harder to block. All in all, I think that this is a really good card for any deck that cares about either reanimating or pulling into your graveyard for value. Next up, we have Emissary Green, who is in 11,000 decks. This is the only of the commanders, so one of the guaranteed cards that you're going to get from the bundle that I'm going to dive into today. But it's a 5-mana creature, human advisor for 3/3 that says, whenever Emissary Green attacks, starting with you, each player votes for profit or security. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to twice the number of profit votes. Put a number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control equal to the number of security votes. Cool. I like that ability. Obviously, his biggest downside is the fact that he doesn't have haste. But if you include this in the 99, it's very easy to just choose to slot this into a commander that grants haste to its creatures. Because if Emissary Green gets the chance to attack, it's only upside for you. Like, both options are really good. I would imagine that you'd usually opt for the voting profit because the 2x factor on that is just great. Or maybe your board state is really good, and so people are like, yeah, I'm going to give you 2 treasures because I do not want to buff up your board even more. So maybe at a minimum, you can count on getting 2 treasure tokens and 3 +1/+1 counters put on every creature that you own. And if that doesn't happen, then the opposite would be that you just put +4 or 4 +1/+1 counters or create 8 untapped treasures. It's a lose-lose situation either way for your opponents, and dependent on how well ramped you are, you might actually prefer the counters every time anyways. One other detail is that the votes do not happen until the ability resolves, so if someone happens to have a stifle effect, they have to cast it while the ability is on the stacked. The rules of this card says that any responses to the ability must be made without knowing the outcome of the vote. So if they're like, oh crap, you're going to make 8 treasure tokens? Yeah, I'm going to stifle that. Well, at that point, it's too late, and you're guaranteed to get those treasures. So for those 11,000 decks that have played this card, I'm curious from your experience if your opponents tend to opt for giving you treasures or buffing your board. And I think that this would just be fun in a Voting Matters deck as well. Our next unloved card is Suppressor Skyguard, which is in 10,100 total decks. This is a 4-mana human knight that has flying and is a 2/4. It says, whenever a player attacks you, if that player has another opponent who isn't being attacked, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this combat. I really like this card as a different and unique take on Pillow Fort. And in some situations, I actually think this could protect you more than a Propaganda or a Ghostly Prison if you're up against a Voltron deck or a Go Tall deck. Because this ability means that in order to attack you, your opponents need to be attacking with a minimum of 3 creatures, assuming that there's 4 players in the game still. So if they attack you and one other opponent with just 2 creatures, that means player 4 is not being attacked, so you would not take any damage, which is sweet. This essentially discourages attacking you until a point in the game where people can attack everyone, by which you are probably late enough in the game that you have answers. Do you hear that, Pramicon players? If you can give your commander and Suppressor Skyguard protection, then enjoy. Once again, I'm not saying this is better than Ghostly Prison or a Propaganda, but I will say that the pay 2 for Propaganda doesn't really stop a Voltron player if they want to one-shot you, just like Suppressor Skyguard doesn't really stop a go-wide deck at all, except for maybe an all-in -2 creatures. The last thing I will say is, funny enough, this card could actually be used as a politics piece, because you can strike deals with an opponent to let them attack you in order for them to get some attack triggers, and you won't kill their attackers, because if you don't block, you won't take any damage. So they'll get the attack trigger for no downside to you as part of a deal that you're willing to make with them. I'd love to hear what people think of this card if you've actually played it, and if you think that if you would prefer this or a Ghostly Prison, I guess it depends. Most people are probably going against go wide decks much more often than they are a Voltron deck. So probably those are still much more popular. Our next card today is Herald of Ilharg, and we're dropping all the way down to 6,290 decks for this one. This is a 3/3 boar beast with trample, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, put 2+1/+1 counters on Herald of Ilharg. If that spell has mana value 5 or greater, Herald of Ilharg deals damage equal to the number of counters on it to each opponent. Yeah, I know when you're reading this is in a very highly contested 4 mana spot, but I think that this creature could hold its own in a creature deck, and if it doesn't get answered, it's bound to do a lot of work. Because the fact that it gets 2+1/+1 counters on it for any creature, including mana dorks, means that this creature can get real big real quick. Especially, maybe this could be a fun piece in a Henzi deck where you're casting a lot of big creatures for a discounted price. After the first cast, that's already 5 damage straight to every opponent. And then the next one, 7, 9. So you get the picture. It's just straight up lightning axing everyone to the face for the first big creature that you cast with this on the board. I think it's a really interesting approach in Gruul because you're dealing non-combat damage, which is typically like a Spellslinger thing, while also being able to deal a lot of combat damage because it's getting bigger and it has trample. Obviously, this works with existing +1/+1 counter decks to stack it up, and for what it's worth, this counts all counters on it, not just +1/+1 counters on it. So if you're playing any deck that cares about putting other kinds of counters on it as well, then this will count those number of counters on it to deal damage to each opponent. This next card is one of my favorites that I'm going to cover today, and that's Corporeal Projection, which is in 5,330 decks. This is an Izzet spell that costs 1 blue and 1 red for a sorcery that says target creature you control gains Myriad until end of turn. And then you can overload it for 3 generic, 2 blue, and 2 red. And that will then give every creature you control Myriad until end of turn. I just think this is so much fun. Obviously, you've heard me before. I really like Izzet. And so, even without the overload, giving any creature access to Myriad for just 2 mana is insane. Like, yeah, Blade of Selves does exist, and it is a pretty popular card, but that's already on the board. And so, people are going to have hesitation. They're like, all right, there's a Blade of Selves. We have to be wary of this. But this, just for 2 mana out of nowhere, can make a massive threat. Because if there's an ETB effect, you're just doubling the mana cost of that creature for just 2 mana, which is an awesome rate. So I'm using, obviously, an extreme example here, but the value train, Etali Primal Conqueror's ability is valued at 7 mana. So if you pay 7 mana for the ETB effect, giving it Myriad will cause 2 others to enter, and even though you only get to keep the original one, that's 14 mana worth of ETB effects for a 2 mana spell. Like I said, extreme example, but I'm sure anyone can think of creatures they would love to give Myriad to. I slot this in with the idea that I'm ready to cast this just for the 2 mana cost, whereas something like Mizzix's Mastery, I'm always trying to cast for the overload. But if I am in a situation where I can cast the overload of this ability, you're likely going to win the game that turn, or you're going to do a lot of damage trying. This might not happen, but, imagine casting this and then an end the turn spell to stifle the Myriad, delayed trigger, and keeping all of the tokens. It's only in 5,000 decks, so let me know if you've played this and what you think of it, because I think that this is just a very fun card that I've used a lot before. Our next card is Conclave Evangelist, which is in 4,760 decks. This card is 5 mana. It costs 3 generic and either split green or white, for a 4/4 Elephant Cleric with Myriad. And it says whenever Conclave Evangelist deals combat damage to a player, create a token that is a copy of Conclave Evangelist. This card is just fun. I will caveat, I haven't played this card, specifically because I do not own a copy. This is one of those that when I opened mine, I was hoping that I'd get it, so maybe I just need to buck up and buy the single. I say, this might be one of those things that you just try once. It makes me think of Cathar's Crusade. Obviously, it's a strong ability, but it makes keeping track a nightmare. I'd imagine it's a similar thing here. You connect with all 3 let's say, and then that will just scale very quickly, or even if you just connect with 2. The next turn, you'll do the math. 3 attacking makes 6 tokens, so if all 8 connect, then it just gets pretty wonky from there. Maybe this is one of those cards where you try once and then you take it out and remember it forever. The last thing that I will say is it could go hard in creature ETB decks like Tristani Selesnya's Voice, or in an extra combats deck like Tifa Martial Artist. If you think the math gets out of hand easily with 1 combat, imagine with 2 or 3 combats in a turn across several turns. If you are enjoying this and you do enjoy just talking or rambling about unpopular cards, I'd love to invite you to our Patreon Discord where we talk about these types of stuff all the time. We have 3 more. Our next one is Aegis of the Legion, which is in 3,640 decks. This is a 2 mana equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has mentor. Whenever equipped creature mentors a creature, put a shield counter on that creature. And it has an equip 3, which is pretty high, but if you're playing Boros, then you can likely get that down pretty easily. Not only do I like this card's ability, it's just insane that it also gives +10 ability haste, +25 armor, and +25 magic resist, because, yeah, if you know, you know. There are a few things that I really like about this card. First of all is the flavor. The idea of the mentor protecting their mentee is just really cool to think about. And I like that it was worth bringing back just for this ability from a random set for the sake of this card. Number 2, shield counters in general are just really good. The fact that it protects against lethal damage or a board wipe is awesome. And not to mention the counters can be proliferated to survive multiple combats or multiple board wipes. Number 3, this card stacks with any instance of mentor. It does not say equipped creature mentors another creature. When it does, put a shield counter on that creature. Instead, it just has a blanket statement of whenever equipped creature mentors a creature, put a shield counter on that creature. So this means that if you play this in Aurelia Exemplar of Justice, which by the way, only 111 of them are playing this, Aurelia would have 2 instances of mentor, so she could choose to mentor the same creature twice to give it 2 +1/+1 counters and 2 shield counters, or she could mentor 2 different creatures to give them both 1. Then, that stacks even more if you have Aurelia the Ward Leader in that deck as well. Not only can this make your board stronger, a lot of times they're small creatures that you want the ability, but they're just so fragile. Take, for example, Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. It's after a few turns, Raggy can die to pretty much anything, but with a mentor, it becomes a 3/2 and a shield counter, so it won't die to anyone blocking it, and it just becomes a lot more likely to resolve the ability. I'm sure you can think of a lot of other creatures that have good attack triggers, but late enough in the game you're like, yeah, I'm going to get the attack trigger, but I'm going to lose this creature. The last thing I will say about this is that the trigger happens at the resolution of the ability. So if you somehow have a 1 or 2 mentor triggers from another creature and have a way to equip this to the mentor at instant speed, the shield counters will be added to it, even though it wasn't equipped at the time the mentor triggers entered the stack. So I think that's a pretty cool thing from the rules of this card. Our second to last highlight today is Memory Vampire, which is in 1,050 decks. This is a 6 mana vampire detective that costs 4 generic, 1 blue, and 1 black. It's 4/4 with flying and has whenever Memory Vampire deals combat damage to a player, any number of target players each mill that many cards. Then you may collect Evidence 9. When you do, you may cast target non-land card from defending player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. I like this ability a lot, but the mana cost is pretty expensive, so maybe this, for me, would be a target for reanimation or one of those decks where you can exile it from the graveyard in order for one of your creatures on the board to copy it. But either way, assuming you are able to deal damage with Memory Vampire, there's a few things that I like about this ability. One is that all of it is voluntary. No one is forced to mill, you're not forced to collect evidence, and you're not forced to cast the spell. So if you are playing this, obviously you want to do all of those things, but let's say there's a stacks piece on the board that will hurt you more for doing so, you can just have this be a 4/4 with flying to damage someone. The second thing is that you can mill any player, including yourself, if you want to fill up your graveyard, and doing so will likely help you to make sure that you have that collect evidence 9 that you can reach. The third thing, people can't try to remove cards from your graveyard once you announce that you're casting a spell. The rules say that once you've announced you're casting a spell, players cannot take actions until you finish doing so. Notably, opponents can't try to remove cards from your graveyard to stop you from collecting evidence. And the last few things that I like about this is that you're able to cast any card that is not a land, and it says, it's a huge plus that you get to cast them. So you get any cast triggers or triggered abilities on your board, or cast triggers from, let's say, an Eldrazi that was in their graveyard. It's not restricted to mana value, and it doesn't say you may cast any card milled this way. So if you see something that you like in the player's graveyard, you can attack them and cast it even though it wasn't put into the graveyard this turn. The extra mill is just an added bonus in case you happen to see something else that you like more instead. Once again, really fun ability, but also really expensive. And so if you have any way to cheat it in or grant it haste, then I think that this is definitely one that you should try out and see what you think of it. Our last card today is Furious Spinesplitter, which is in only 302 decks. Like, are you kidding me? That is very low. For perspective, the least played Bloomburrow card is Seedpod Squire, which is in 1,150 decks for the same mana cost, and it's been out much less time than this has. But anyways, this is a 4 mana creature. It's an Ogre Warrior with 3/3 and Trample. It says at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on Furious Spinesplitter for each opponent that was dealt damage this turn. Maybe I'm the only person who likes this enough to think that it's better than being in only 300 decks. It is in red, which is the color that benefits the most for maybe dealing damage to each of your opponents. But I'd imagine maybe it's only in 300 because it's in Gruul. If this was mono red, maybe it could fit into more decks. But even still, Gruul's whole game plan revolves around turning sideways with big creatures and dealing a lot of damage. It has trample, so that's the main keyword you need when a creature is built to get big. And all you need is either an aggro deck or any deck that plays Impact Tremors or any sort of pinger whatsoever. Because entering, it will deal damage to each opponent, and then it will become a 6/6 with trample. Next turn, it will be a 9/9, or even more if you have cards that double the number of counters put on a creature. And so yeah, I admit this is a 4/4, it's an uncommon, but that's also the other reason why I included this, is because I've become more interested in playing Pauper EDH. I've never actually played it, so let me know, anyone who does play, if this would actually be a terrible commander for Pauper EDH. But if you're not familiar, in PDH, you can have an uncommon card be your commander, and then everything else in the deck is common. If this was my first Pauper EDH deck that I built, the route that I'd probably go would be to play this, and then cards like Impact Tremors, Spear Spewer, there's Firebrand Archer, or Wildfire Elemental, or anything like that. I'd probably go the route of Firebrand Archer effects and try a Gruul Spellslinger deck that can win with either non-combat damage or having a massive commander that just gets bigger and bigger every single turn. I'd love to know, if any of my viewers actually care about Pauper EDH, or, if anyone is interested in that. If so, then every once in a while I could dedicate a video towards that. I'm not sure how big the PDH community is, because like I said, I've never built a deck for it, and I don't have friends that play it, but I'm interested because, well, that aligns with my style and the unpopularity of cards. But that's everything that I have today. Like I said, I'm actually a really big fan of this set and the cards that are in it. I think all of the abilities are really unique, and a lot of them are pretty good at breaking the color pie of what is typically done in those colors. But let me know what you think. If you have played any of these cards, did you like them? And let me know in the comments below if there are any other sets or subsets that you would like me to make a video on. But thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.